समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
What we are talking about is easy to guess given the fact that Snehesh Alex Philip is with me. If you are a defense buff, even if you are not a defense buff, chances are that you've seen the stories with some celebration that Indian Armed Forces, Indian Army in this case, Ministry of Defense, you can give credit to whoever, they've placed orders for 7,000 crores worth of artillery guns. These are Indian private sector made artillery guns. That's the important thing. These guns are called ATAGS, ATAGS, which is Advanced Towed Artillery Gun System. See the picture, what does it look like? It's on your screens. Now this order is for 307 guns, divided between two Indian private sector manufacturers, both formidable engineering companies in India. So 60% of this will go to Kalyani Group's Bharat Forge, and I will share a picture with you. Please see, this is many years ago when I had gone to Pune to record a Walk the Talk with Baba Kalyani, and these artillery guns was his dream at that point. At that point, Government of India was not even buying anything from the private sector. In fact, the degree of difficulty was so high, as Baba Kalyani would explain to you, that if you design an artillery gun in India, you could not even test fire it. For test firing it, you had to take so many permissions that it was better to take the gun overseas and fire it there. And even to take the gun overseas, you had to take so many permissions. I'm sure each one of those in triplicate, right? In spite of that, these entrepreneurs kept at it. So he's got the order for 60% of these guns, 307 guns. He was L1, so he was the lowest bidder to distribute the order, and also I presume to create competition and capacity in different companies, because a lot of the work in this gun has come in from DRDO, Defense Research and Development Organization. That is how defense research should work. You should develop ideas, concepts, technologies, and give them to whoever can manufacture them best and at the cheapest price, may it be in the public sector or in the private sector. In this case, the private sector. So 40% of the order has gone to the Tata Group, that is the Tata Advanced Systems Limited. They've matched the L1 bid of the Kalyani Group. So 60-40, these two private companies make these guns. This is also a time when we see more and more Indian companies, but particularly three big companies. There are many Indian companies which are now doing small arms. It was a great shame that we were not doing any small arms, not even tamanchas in India. Now we are doing that. But the important thing is that artillery was Indian Army's biggest bugbear. The last artillery order was in 1986-87. That led to the Bofors scandal. India imported 410 Bofors guns. In fact, if I take you back to the war in Kargil, Indian Army used a lot of these guns in a massed artillery fire. That is something which had not been done until then for a very long time in modern warfare. In fact, the brigadier leading the artillery then, if I remember his name correctly, Lakhwinder Singh, he said that he got inspiration for using masked artillery from what he had read about the battles that Maharaja Ranjit Singh fought, because he used to use masked artillery to pulverize his opposition, and he used the same method. But it was also said that Indian Army had only one gun that really worked, and a stage came when almost all of the Bofors guns of Indian Army were deployed in Kargil and areas around that. So that also showed up the artillery deficiencies of Indian Army. However, it's taken more than 2 decades to start compensating for those deficiencies. Until a few years back, that was still the only thing that represented real strength for Indian artillery. Remember, in modern warfare, artillery is the hammer that any army uses from a distance. That's also the evidence of the war in Ukraine, for example. It is the artillery that is inflicting casualties. It is the artillery that is making infantry move forward. In fact, if anything, the limitations of armor have been exposed. It's long-range artillery and drones, which are the arbiters in the war that's taking place between a much bigger power and a much smaller power, but again, well equipped with artillery and long-range ammunition. So artillery is the key thing. India for a long time just had these 1400 Bofors guns. They made a decisive difference in Kargil. We'll talk about it as we go along. And the army was always asking for more guns. But there was a hesitation. Why? That was the Bofors syndrome, that if I buy anything, there will be a scandal. How scandalous was this Bofors fixation or post-Bofors fixation? With Bofors, we had got a full transfer of technologies. Those drawings were also sitting there. But nobody had the courage to even take those out and start improving the Bofors guns. That is also a process that started finally in 2009, 2010, and that led to a new version of Bofors, that is the upgun version of Bofors, that is called Dhanush now. Now back to the latest order. The latest order is 307 guns in all with 327 towing vehicles. And these will make about 15 artillery regiments. Let me also tell you what an artillery regiment is like. An artillery regiment has 3 batteries of 6 guns each, approximately. Everything is approximate. So 18 guns, 18 artillery guns per regiment. Each artillery gun employs a lot of people at any given point of time when the gun is operating. About nine soldiers are involved with the operations of the gun because there is ammunition has to be handled, etc., etc. Indian Army at this point, and these are publicly known figures, has 241 regiments of artillery, of which 21 regiments carry Bofors. That's the situation right now. This particular gun, ATAGS, which has been ordered, is 19 tons, heavy, which has a significance that Snehesh will explain to you, but I will just for contrast tell you that ultra-light howitzers or M777 guns that India imported from the US, 145 pieces of it. It's called ultralight howitzer because it's actually just over 4 tons. So almost about 1/5 the weight of this gun. The same caliber 155, it is made of titanium. That's why it can be lifted by Chinook helicopters from one hill feature or one hill range to the other if needed, and that's very effective, can be very effective, particularly in the eastern Himalayas, where on the Indian side we have parallel ranges of Himalayan mountains. You can shift one from one to the other. This one, however, is 19 tons, which has its own significance, at which point I think my lack of expertise will begin to show. So I turn to Snehesh. So Snehesh, what does this order mean?
Well, this order is very significant in the sense that, this was a program that was the development process which started way back in 2013. And it's now in 2025 that the CCS has gone clear. The contract has still not been signed. The contract will be signed next week. So it's a journey which has taken
CCS is Cabinet Committee on Security.
Cabinet Committee on Security, which is headed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So the contract would be signed next week. So this is a program. The first gun was unveiled in 2016. So it was a 4-year development program where the DRDO was the designer, and it had brought in these 2 private firms, and it was a co-development thing, right? And right from the very beginning, the plan was that the L1 would get 60% of the contract, and the second one would get 40% of the contract. Now what happens is that one would have assumed that the ATAGS, since this is an India-made gun system, would be the mainstay as far as Indian Army is concerned. However, the gun for the future that the Indian Army is focusing on is called the towed gun system. The TGS. It's in short form, it's known as the TGS. Now the difference, you mentioned about the weight, and that is where one of the criticality lies. For example, the ATAGS. It's a fantastic gun. It has fired at very long range at 47 kilometers of range way back in 2017. But the fact is that the ATAGS is a heavy gun, right? So it's somewhere between 18 to 19 tons. So what the army is looking at a lighter version. So they have come out with an RFI, which is request for information for the TGS. They say that the maximum weight should be 15 tons, which means that this would literally be over 3.5-4 tons less than what ATAGS is. So now there is a whole thought process that that the companies are also, DRDO is also working on a lighter version of the ATAGS. That's something that they are working on. So 307 of the ATAGS, and I think future orders would be for TGS and not necessarily for repeat orders for ATAGS.
And why is weight so critical?
Weight is critical because the plan is that most of these guns would be deployed. Besides, of course, along with the borders with Pakistan, operations against Pakistan, but also in the mountains. And for mountains, the weight is critical because this is a towed gun system, right? Which means that it has been towed. It's not a self-propelled one. It's not a mounted gun system, which means that there's a vehicle which tow it, and the more heavier it is difficult to tow at the speed at which you would want in the mountain. So the maneuvering the gun system becomes difficult, and that's why the army is looking at having a lighter gun system. For example, you mentioned about the M777s. These weigh about 4 tons. It's so light. As you rightly mentioned, these guns are deployed, all the 145 of them are deployed in the eastern sector, because it can be, and in the northern sector, which is when we're talking about Ladakh side, the Dhanush have started coming in, and it has been deployed there. So the ATAGS, given the weight, I'm not really sure how many of these ATAGS would eventually be deployed along the borders with China, but the TGS is something that they're looking at deploying.
But ATAGS would be quite effective, say, in the plains, because India needs a lot of artillery in the plains.
Yes, ATAGS would be very handy, very powerful when it comes to the plains. But at the same time, while I say this, I think the ATAGS also went through the winter trials and high altitude trials. When I say high altitude trials, the trials didn't take place in Ladakh. The trials took place in Sikkim, where it did very well way back in 2020. That's when it had finished the 2021 actually, when it had finished the high altitude winter trials.
Yeah. In the mountains though, particularly say Ladakh kind of mountains, see the concepts we used to hear earlier when say Bofors was bought. General Sundarji said, I chose this because of its shoot and scoot ability. But shoot and scoot doesn't matter in those mountains. There, I think guns have to be dug in. Guns have to be dug in and positioned where they are.
Exactly. So, for example, when you talk about mounted gun system, people say that why don't you deploy mounted gun system in the mountains? Because these mounted gun systems.
What's a mounted gun system? We'll also show a picture on the screen.
So, mounted gun system is a program that the Indian Army is pursuing, wherein which you have the gun which is fixed on top of a vehicle. Let's say a truck, right? So it's a program which is on, and different companies are vying for this particular project. Again, this is something which is open for the Indian companies. But there are multiple locations when you fire a weapon. It's not so easy that you can. It's not like you're carrying a rifle, right? That you shoot, or you're carrying a sniper that you shoot and then you can change your location, right? There is, as you mentioned, there are a number of people who are involved. And at different places,
lots of ammunition has to be transported.
Exactly.
Each shell with its casing and everything can go up to 100 kilos. And now you have smart shells.
Smart shells.
Which may weigh even more.
Exactly. So, which means that it's not so easy to shoot and scoot. Shoot and scoot sounds good.
And the planes.
in the planes, and plus when you talk about shoot and scoot, it's a very jazzy kind of a concept.
Shoot and
right?
scoot, usually it only works in office politics, I can, I can tell you. So, not in real life war fighting.
So when it comes to artillery, it is not such a simple thing, and especially when it comes to the mountains. Even at the plains, you can still do it. Mountains give you less maneuvering space. There are a lot of other equipments that have to be brought in. Plus, also at various places, terrain and all is such that the weight and all doesn't allow the vehicles to move that quickly. So it moves very slowly. So as you rightly mentioned, the mountains, they actually look at places where they can cover very easily behind the slopes and such ways where the enemy fire can be protected against.
Yeah, because these days technology is such that जैसे कहते हैं कि मारने वाले से बचाने वाला बड़ा होता है, that works in modern warfare as well, because when somebody fires a missile, a shell from a long range artillery, the other side has the equipment to immediately zero in on where it came from.
Exactly.
So the time for you is very little, because you will have a retaliatory something coming at you with your name written on it. That's why if you can do shoot and scoot, it works. But where you can't do shoot and scoot, you have to be dug in.
Absolutely.
So how far are we from this mounted gun program?
Well, the trials are yet to start, so it's a process which is on, and I can't really say how much time is going to take, but it's going to take some time. But for example, since we're talking about mountains, interesting. For example, you have the K9 Vajras. The K9 Vajras were initially ordered not for the mountains, not for Ladakh, but for the plains, right? And when the delivery ended and when the standoff with China began, the army tried it out by sending about 3 units. And when I say units, I don't mean regiments or anything. I mean
3 guns.
3 guns. 3 K9 Vajras to Ladakh, where winter kits were installed on it. Winter kits means there are some changes that are done, different kinds of lubricants and other things.
Yeah, so it doesn't freeze.
Yeah, it doesn't freeze. And they used it, and then they realized that these K9 Vajras work perfectly well in the mountainous terrain.
And that's made by Larsen and Toubro.
That's made by Larsen and Toubro at their Hazira plant.
Yeah. So that's the third Indian engineering company. I told you 3 earlier. I had mentioned the 2 that are involved in the ATAGS program. The company that has also made great strides is Larsen and Toubro, which has been working closely with defense for a long time. In fact, if you look at what's happening with the Arihant class submarines, L&T is an integral part of that submarine development, that ultra modern nuclear submarine development, SSBN in fact.
Actually, I can say that when the L&T came into the defense business, they came actually with the SSBN project. So that's how they made their entry into defense.
That's right. So now you have three Indian companies, which is a big deal. Now, after such a long freeze on artillery, this was a time when Chinese went forward, the Pakistanis went forward in so many areas, but we were in the Bofors freeze. And that Bofors tamasha still carries on, right? Because it's still a blot on the Indian acquisition system. And that's why our acquisition has become so complicated over time. In fact, just today we are publishing a story from Snehesh that tells you that Defense Ministry has now decided to cut the acquisition procedure by half. That means the time taken for acquiring something new will be half, which still will be a very long time.
Will still be a very long time.
But half is much better than full.
Absolutely.
Right? It was too long, because even if you look at the ATAGS guns, the trials which the gun actually passed were conducted in 2022.
Yeah.
And the Cabinet Committee on Security clearance has come only now. Also, one tiny point I want to make. This costs only 7,000 crores. I say only 7,000 crores because in terms of military purchases, it is not that much of money.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that much of money, and these deliveries will take about 3 years for these companies to manufacture. However, last year's budget, if you see the budget papers, Defense Forces returned 13,000 crores. That's almost twice as much as this 7,000 crore order, unspent to the
Unspent,
exchequer,
yeah.
because there is so much cholesterol in the defense acquisition pipeline,
system, yeah,
right?
exactly.
In the system, that they are not able to buy anything, and that is India's real tragedy. So Snehesh, I see from something, a conversation you had done with Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar, who's a former DG Artillery.
I would actually call him the father of India's modern artillery program, because everything started under his tenure when he was a DDG artillery.
Yeah. So he mentioned in that one that in 2009, 2010, India came up with a new artillery plan that was called Artillery Profile 2017,
Yeah.
which means in the next 9 to 10 years, this had to happen. It's taken another 9 or 10 years after that. But that besides, he said at that point that there were 7 kinds of artillery that Indian Army was working on. What
Yeah.
were these 7 types?
So the 7 types were the Dhanush, which is the upgraded version of Bofors. Some call it the Desi Bofors, which people who make it really get upset with the whole tag of Desi. Then was the M777s. The Bofors have come, the M777s have come. Then is the mounted gun system, which is there, which is still a work in process. ATAGS is still a work in progress. Deliveries of the contract will be signed next week, and the deliveries will begin. Then you had, the BrahMos missile, which was there, which the Indian Army already has. The ranges have been extended. Earlier, it was about 290 odd kilometers. Right now, I can tell you for the fact that Army has BrahMos with ranges of over 400 kilometers. Which are again been upgraded, and the ranges have been increased to 700 kilometers. The work is on for that. Then you also have the rocket system, the Pinaka ER, extended range rocket systems that are in the works.
Which is now also being exported to Armenia. So who's making that?
The Pinaka is made by number of companies are involved in making the Pinaka, but primarily it is done by the DPSU. But you also have the private companies making different components for the Pinaka missiles. So this was the artillery profile that they were looking at. In between, you also now have the towed gun system that we were talking about, the TGS.
Yeah. So
Which I'm not sure whether it was part of the 2009 RT profile.
These were the 7. Now artillery. I told you earlier that Ukraine war has shown that modern warfare is really warfare between rival artillery forces and drones. And also, what's the range of drones? It's very difficult to hide now, because one, you have radars and sensors which can pick out the adversaries' artillery and missile systems, but also now you have drones, and there is a drone satellite communication combination whereby a drone can identify a target, relay the target's coordinates back to the firing team. Firing team on a laptop can decide.
Exactly.
Firing team in a bunker just on a laptop can fire at the adversary, right, while the drone is still there. And now this has become a very complicated system at this point. Snehesh, the other thing that we know is that some of these manufacturers, there is Tata's, there is Kalyani and L&T. So in some cases, they are making artillery which is not being bought by the Indian Army, very modern, very potent artillery, but they are able to export it, particularly to Armenia.
Yeah.
So what exactly are those guns and who's doing it?
So the Armenia had initially gone in for with Kalyani Group for its artillery. Then Armenia went in for the Nexter guns. These are actually French guns. They have a partnership with the Lasnan Toba L&T here. So Armenia has contracted, instead of contracting the French, the Armenia has contracted L&T, which is making these guns and will export to Armenia. So both ATAGS as well as Nexter guns are both guns which the Indian Army had not bought, and the Armenians have bought from India. But interestingly, the Nexter was in competition with an Israeli towed gun system called the Ethos, which is manufactured by Israeli company Elbit. So the Indian Army, while this whole process was on, was looking at buying these guns, and the Israeli weapon system had beaten the Nexter.
The French system.
Yeah, the French system, and it emerged as the L1. However, that contract could never work through. The army tried its level best to come out to try and get these ATAGS guns, but the larger thought process was that we already have the ATAGS, and that's where the focus should be.
So indigenously developed. You have an acronym for that. That IDDM. क्या बोलते हैं?
IDDM, indigenously developed, designed, and manufactured.
Manufactured. So that was the idea. So now when the contract comes up for towed gun system, which is really the future,
Yeah.
right? Then who do you see bidding there, and who do you see? What kind of guns do you see being on offer?
See,
And will imports also be in the picture, or will these be purely Indian made?
see, there would be no imports in the picture. These would be purely Indian made. So they would be different. They would be phases of indigenization that would be there. So when I say Indian system, doesn't just mean that full under the IDDM category. It's fully under the IDDM category. They could meet IDDM category. For example, let's say an ex company ties up with a company abroad and then manufactures the gun here, right? With changes to its design, with changes to other things. It all depends on the technicalities of how the RFP is worded and how the company does at its own end. But eventually, I would assume that all these companies that I mentioned, the three companies that you mentioned, Tata would be there, Kalyani would be there, L&T would be there. I also expect other defense companies like Mahindra to be
Yes.
there. So
Particularly companies that have some automotive manufacturing ability, yes.
manufacturing
or
capability.
large engineering companies like
Exactly.
L&T. And from whatever I read and understand, also from your interview with General Shankar, now it looks like that Modi government and armed forces don't really care where an Indian manufacturer gets their technology from.
Exactly.
So they could do their joint ventures, they could do get their technology and get into competitive bids.
Yeah, absolutely. And get into the competitive bids. The government is of the opinion that not everything can be purely made in India. You can have tie-ups, you can have joint ventures with foreign companies and manufacture in India. And manufacture, and at the same time, the government is also saying, don't manufacture just for India, but manufacture for the world.
Yeah.
And
artillery guns are very complex. Artillery guns are not like old-fashioned topkhana as we used to see, but we've also seen that historically, those who had guns, those who brought the first guns into medieval battle, they ruled the world at that point. Yeah. Ottomans, for example, Babur brought guns, right? Anybody who brought guns, Chinese invented the gunpowder, and since then, increasingly, and now even more so, because artillery has such long ranges that artillery guns decide who's going to win, who's going to lose, and inflict casualties. In fact, bulk of the casualties in today's modern warfare are inflicted by long-range artillery.
There's a reason why artillery is known as the god of war.
Yeah, god of war, or maybe if you're on the other side, it's not quite god of war. It's Yamdut for you, or not for you, Yamdut for the adversary. That said, I will tell you a story about artillery guns, and it's a story I've told earlier, but it bears repetition because it's a mistake that I once made, a big mistake about artillery. So covering Operation Blue Star, and I was in Amritsar during Operation Blue Star, we saw these 25-pounder guns, artillery guns, being taken, hauled in front of the Golden Temple. They were also raised higher up on a terrace and firing from there. Now, when you thought of artillery, you thought artillery guns fire at a trajectory,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I did write in a story that how accurate Indian gunners were, that they were firing these artillery guns and they were only going and hitting the target, which in that case was the Akal Takht Sahib building. That is where Bhindranwale and his key people were. However, all my friends in the army, after the story came out, told me that rest of your story was fine, but listen, from such a close range, we cannot fire at trajectory. These were 25-pounder guns, light mountain guns. We were firing them in the direct mode, right?
Yeah.
in the direct mode like that. Not like that. Like that with the breeze and all, they could have gone into people's homes, created real havoc. So it was a moment of embarrassment. And that is something that General Sundarji never let me forget. Because anytime I'd say something, he'd say, "Arey, you called those 25 you said those 25 pounders were firing at trajectory, huh? 200 yards away. You defense journalists, you can't tell the difference between caliber and bore, except that you can be big bores despite having low caliber." Right? So that joke was on me. But you tell me the difference. We are talking artillery guns, the difference between bore and caliber.
There is a mathematical formula that is there, but in simpler terms, the bore is the diameter of the barrel, which is there, and the caliber refers to the diameter of the ammunition that is fired,
Of the shell that's
Of the
fired
sh-
through.
of the shell
so,
that is
so,
fired
so for
through.
ease of understanding, I will steal Snehesh's tea and pour his tea into my cup and then try and explain that if this is a gun barrel, then this diameter will be the bore of the gun. So this will be the bore of the gun, and this projectile that's fired from it or shell, that will be the caliber. It's about the same. There might be a very minute difference. Why? Also because the barrel in a modern gun is rifled. It's rifled. And when the shell goes out, the projectile goes out, it's also spinning because of the rifling effect. However, there are two more factors there. One factor is the size of the shell. So shell can be the same diameter, but it can be this big or it can be this big. And that will have implications for how much fuel it has, how much explosive it has, how far it goes, what kind of aerodynamics,
The accuracy of it, yeah.
it follows. And now you have smart shells, etc. We are not going there. Aaj ke liye, it's out of our syllabus. The other important thing is the length of the barrel. If you Google the Bofors guns India bought was called 155/37. What that meant was that the bore or the caliber was loosely the same, was 155 mm, but the length of the barrel was 37. What does that 37 mean? That 37 means the length of the barrel is arrived at by dividing it by the bore of the gun. Accordingly, with the original Bofors gun, which was 155/37, the length of the barrel was 155 millimeters multiplied by 37. It comes to 5.42 meters, which equals 17.9386, say 17.9 feet. Quite a long barrel. However, now as the guns being modernized, and this is the modern standard now because guns now must have longer range, barrels are getting bigger. So the current standard is 155/52. Snehesh, is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
And I think a lot of the Bofors guns have already been
Upgunned,
upgunned to that. I
Yeah.
think more than a couple of hundred already.
Yes.
And the rest are on the way. This one, if you want to figure out the length of the barrel, again multiply 155 mm by 52. This comes to 8.06 meters, which equals 26.532 feet. So this is our artillery one-on-one today. I think a very elementary lesson which all of us learn as we go along in our jobs. In any case, Snehesh, you do much better than me
I learned from you, sir.
in this area because you are also that much more modern. We are the pre-Google era.